Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's Leanne here and we are going to do something really exciting today. I've done a video or two for Let's Resin before and they contacted me again and asked me if I would like to use some of their alcohol inks with this new 2020 mold and do a little blog post for them on the process, which I am more than happy to do. I've never used alcohol inks before and I'm really excited to try this out, but bear with me, this will not be so much as of a tutorial as it normally is, because like I said, I've never used alcohol ink. I had a little play around with them when they first arrived. I think I know what I'm doing. I think I've got the basics down and we're going to get into it. Now their alcohol inks, I'm just going to show you here, is a set of 14, I've got it open so I can show you, 14 colours, and it actually comes with a few different whites. It comes with, sorry, I'll just find them here, a normal white, so it has a couple of those, and it also comes with deeper white, and I'm assuming that means that this white makes your ink sink further. So the normal white, I tested this one already, kind of keeps your ink on the surface, but the deeper white I'm assuming will make it sink more. So I'm going to be using both of them, and because I've seen a million tutorials for ink, the Petri dish version, and they're pretty much all the same technique, yes, I'm going to try it, but I'm going to just use this up a little bit by using a little battery powered set of fairy lights that I purchased on eBay. And we're going to get some glitter in here. We're going to make this 2020 mold something worthy of sticking on the wall, and this is also a Let's Resin mold. This is the one they want me to showcase this month, and let's get to it. The first thing we're going to do is mix up our 50/50 epoxy. I'm going to do it with my normal method of heating up my epoxy to remove the bubbles, and I'm going to give myself a nice even layer, probably about 1 centimeter thick, on this whole mold. So I'm going to speed up the boring parts of me mixing my resin, and we will come back once we have resin in this mold. It is quite a thick mold, so we're looking at a good centimeter thick, just to be able to play with the inks. Okay, I'm just going to mix up some of my epoxy resin. Now before we get into this, there's something I want to talk about, and that is how this piece finishes up in this video. I discovered while doing this that my resin is actually quite thick even when it's been preheated, and it affects how the ink actually sinks in the resin when you want the desired effect. Now with this method, it's called the Petri dish effect. Your ink is supposed to fall and drip into your resin and create a textured surface when you look at it from the front. And because my resin is quite a thick bodied resin, it suspends the ink a little too much, so I don't actually get the desired effect at the end of this video. And that is in no way down to the ink. That is, my resin is old, I'm in a cold country, so my resin is a little bit thicker, and even with preheating it still stays a little bit on the thick side. So I don't get the desired effect that you're supposed to get, even though I follow all the steps of dripping on my colour, followed by my deeper white, then my colour again, then my deeper white as many times as you feel is necessary. Most of my ink does not actually sink. So I just want to make that clear here in this part of the video as you watch me dripping in my inks, that this is purely, I think, a fault with the resin I used, and a lot of resins are actually a lot thinner, a lot more fluid, and all the videos I've watched, the resin seems more like a water consistency, whereas you can see mine is very slow moving. It's very good at holding things in the resin up, which is not good when you're using alcohol inks. So dismiss that and just act as if this all works perfectly well, and this is the process that you would use if you had more fluid resin. Now the other thing I want to point out here is I went straight in with my clear resin and my alcohol inks. I should have first made my little fairy lights, the shape to go in the mold, and put them in a dry mold without any resin, poured in my clear resin, and then worked with my inks. So if you're doing this, I suggest putting your fairy lights in first. I didn't really think of it until I realised I'd put the ink on. But because, like I said, my ink sat mostly on the surface of my resin, the fairy lights actually helped push in the ink and cause some texture and dimension in my piece, which actually worked out in my favour. But if you have nice fluid watery resin and this technique works perfectly for you, then I would put in the fairy lights first, then the resin, then your inks, because all your lights would be at the front of the piece, whereas some of my lights are at the front and some are at the back when I finish this piece. So I just had to get that off my chest, and here I am just doing the layers. Into your clear resin, you just drip your colour, drip your white, drip your colour. It's like a process. You do it in 2 or 3 layers until you feel that you have enough of the resin going down to the bottom of the mould. And because this is a semi-transparent mould, you can see if you look at the side whether your resin is dropping, so to speak. And this is how I knew that my resin was holding the ink up on the surface and not actually doing what it was meant to. So instead I add some glitter here just for some weight to help drag some of that ink down. I'm just really trying to break the surface and put something a bit heavier in my resin to make it go down. And off camera I actually take that little spoon and I stab my resin in a few places for that technique to happen. And like I said, it's purely my resin. It's the consistency of my resin and not the ink, because I've seen many people have this technique with no issue. And this is where I get the fairy lights out and I start moulding and shaping them to the way that I want them to go in the resin. And this is what I really should have done before the mould had any resin in it. It would have been a lot easier because the wire is very bendy and it likes to stand up in places. And when your resin is very wet and you have all this ink going on, it just becomes very messy. But I decided rather than redo this whole video, I wanted to show you that even when things don't turn out right, that you sometimes mess up the steps. Sometimes it can work out in your favour, as it did for me. This is me trying to put the lights in the actual resin, messing with them a little bit, realising, yep, I should have done this first because the wire does not want to lie down in the mould and it's a little bit awkward. So I decide, after messing with it for a little while, I'm going to let my resin just solidify to the point that it's quite firm, and that way it will be easier to work with my wires after the resin is kind of solidified. So I get them kind of in there and then I just leave them alone once I've got them in. So this is when I come back, and as you can see, the resin has firmed up a lot. So the wires that are left sticking out, I'm taking the flat end of my scalpel and I'm just pressing the wires down flat onto the surface. And this just tucks all those wires down out of the way that I've left sticking up. And I'm going to do a second layer. This time I'm just taking my unheated resin because I'm going to add glitter to this, so bubbles don't really matter. And I'm going to give like a camouflage layer to hide these wires at the back. I'm just mixing up my resin as you do. As you can see, even from the cup, my resin is quite thick. And it is Scotland, it is always cold here, and it is old resin. I've been trying to use up this resin for many videos, and it just seems like Mary Poppins bottle of resin that never ends. No matter how much I make, I just seem to still have a lot of it. So yeah, I maybe should just bite the bullet and order myself some of the Let's Resin and try this again with their inks and their resin and show you how it is meant to look. But I still think this turned out pretty, so I'm still going to upload this video because it's still a process. I still do it the way you're supposed to do it. It just doesn't look exactly how it's meant to, but it's still cool. So I'm adding my layer here. I'm just filling up the rest of the mold. I'm really just more concerned about making sure that I get all those wires completely covered. As you can see, the battery pack sticks out upwards towards the ceiling of the back of this, and that's so when I stand this up later, it's not underneath sticking down that will cause the 2020 to fall over. You want that bit of wire to stick straight up out of your mold, so it'll be hidden at the back. Okay, now another thing you may actually query about this video is how many times I use my heat gun. With these molds, as I pointed out before, you should never overheat them as you confuse your resin to your molds. But I use my heat gun on the lowest setting, which is barely warm, just to help with some distribution of the resin to make it a little more watery. Like I said, my resin is cold. so it just helps things flow, but I'm always careful not to make sure it gets too hot so it doesn't ever fuse to the mold. I unmolded this pretty easily. I was just careful about squeezing out all those shapes slowly and prizing them away gently so I didn't rip the mold, and it came out absolutely perfect, as you can see here. And it's maybe not perfect the way that I wanted it. A couple dots of the ink got through in places, as you can see on the red area, but a lot of the times it's actually the fairy lights that have pushed the ink down, and only a few of the fairy lights actually managed to get through that ink to the front layer. But I still like it. It still turned out pretty cool. As you can see, the glitter did its job and sunk straight to the bottom because it was much heavier. So on the back, off camera, I sanded down the edges a little bit, tidied up all those edges, and I'm going to give it one more layer. This is to add some width to this piece so that it can stand up as a sign, and it also helps tidy off the back, make it all nice and domed and look like a more finished product. You don't need to do this. You can completely sand off those little edges at the back and just leave it. But I like things to look completely finished back and front. So I'm just making up another half cup of my resin in the same glitter. And I'm just going to dome the back of this piece to those little ridges that I've left. And that shall be my piece done. Now, if you do dome this, make sure you do it a little tiny bit at a time. My tip for doming is always to put a small amount in the middle of where you are doming, all the way across your piece, and then take something like a cocktail stick or something pointy and work that resin to the edges before you top it up and let it self-level. I do drip it a couple of places. I'm busy talking to my daughter while I'm doing this and she distracts me, and I look her way a couple of times and do manage to drip resin on my piece, but you'll see as long as you quickly clean it up, it doesn't cause any issues. It's very easy to clean off with just a baby wipe. Now, while you're watching me do this, I do actually want to talk about the inks in the mold that I was sent. I mean, this is semi like a review, I guess. I've now been working with electric resin molds a few times over the last couple of months, and I absolutely love them. They're really good molds. I don't have a problem with demolding. I don't have any problems with reactions with my resin, and they generally do seem to have a really good shiny surface which comes out in your piece. The inks are very pigmented. You saw them earlier on in the video. I got them on my hands and stained my hands. It is now a couple of days later and I still have the stain under a couple of my nails that I can't get off. They work perfectly. Since making this video, I've tried them in a couple of other pieces and confirmed that it is my resin that is the issue and not the alcohol inks. And I just like them. They're very affordable for a set of 14 when you look at other alcohol inks on the market. They're a really good price point. They're a really good range of colours, and I like the fact they come with several variations of the white, which is the most used colour, and I like the fact that they're just a good handy little size, vibrant colours, and I think I'm going to be making things with them in the future, using them as dye. I might come back to this Petri dish method when I get some thinner resin, but overall I'm really happy with them. I really like them. I think Let's Resin is quite a good company. I've had no problems with communication, and when they post things out, it does take a little while because they're in China and I'm in Scotland, but I've had no issues with the items coming damaged or anything. They're always well packaged. They always come in the same kind of time frame. There you go, I'm spilling my resin. I was busy talking to my daughter. So I'm just sticking a baby wipe round a little stick and I just rub it, wipe across the paper underneath to get all the resin so it doesn't adhere to the front, and it's a quick clean up. So once I have my resin all spread out, I am just going in and topping up the resin, and it will self-level and spread out on the piece, and you just do this until you have the desired height and nice dome. Don't make it too thick or you will get spillage, but you just want a nice little dome on that to finish the piece. This will just give stability to the piece and give it more width to sit on when you set it up and use it as a sign. So with my resin, I always leave them overnight, so it's a cure between 8 and 12 hour kind of resin. So once I've done this, I leave it till the very next day to cure. So this is the next morning. As you can see, nice and shiny, nice and cured. Now I could dome the front if I really wanted to. I might actually do that in the future, but I don't really need to. The molds have a pretty decent finish on them, as you can see. And there is some texture in there due to me messing around with the wires and some of the ink managing to get further in. I mean, you can see the texture is starting to work at the very back of the mold. What the ink was doing what it was meant to do. It just wasn't heavy enough to get through my thick resin. And I still love this piece regardless. I'm still going to set it up on my shelf and use it. I like the fact that there's not an overwhelming amount of fairy lights. If you do put the lights in the front of the mold, obviously you're going to get all lights in the front of the mold. I actually think I prefer it having less. I like how irregular and not well placed they are. It just seems more organic to me. And this is where it sits in my craft room now, in front of my test tube of rainbows, where I keep some beads. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful, even with all my mistakes. Post a comment below of the next videos you would like to see from me. I have more of my resin beginners video series coming, and I will be posting a blog post with this on the Let's Resin website with instructions on how to make this. So ta-ra for now, see you in the next video.